Have Nik Bonitto and Jonathon Cooper officially broken out as a top-tier pass rushing duo around the NFL? Did the win over the New York Jets prove and provide enough evidence that the Denver Broncos have a legitimate Super Bowl championship caliber defense? And what did the win over ranked Iowa State do for the Colorado Buffaloes in terms of the trajectory of the remainder of their season? All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin with a special shout out to our friends at Denver Regenerative Medicine. Guys, if weight loss has been a struggle for you, it's time for something real. At Denver Regenerative Medicine, they use full-strength GLP-1 medications with doctor oversight. You can start today with a free consultation and get real results for under $300 a month. We have to have the conversation, in my opinion, about Nik Bonitto and Jonathon Cooper, who are coming off of a significant performance as a collective defense for the Denver Broncos against the New York Jets team that, although in the box score shows 13-11, that almost doesn't do it the justice as an ugly slugfest football game to the historic day in London that the Broncos had in the early hours of our NFL Sunday this past weekend. The Broncos sacked Justin Fields 9 times, matching the number of completions that the first-year Jets quarterback had on the game, none of which of those 9 were more than 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. Now, Nik Bonitto may have had his coming-out party last season. He had back-to-back weeks with touchdowns in prime time against the Colts and the Browns. He had a Monday Night Football interview with Scott Van Pelt's the first time I'd seen a Broncos player do that in a significant length of time, at least to my memory, as great as Patrick Surtain, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, and all that played. The Broncos didn't have the best primetime history in recent years, especially during the early season with Russell Wilson. The Broncos as a team led the NFL in sacks. Nik Bonitto was among the top pass rushers in that statistical sack category last year. So it kind of felt like Nik Bonitto was riding the wave in the 2024 season, where he went from kind of a relatively unknown 64th overall pick as a pass rusher who took a couple of years to kind of find his footing now in his 4th season in the NFL. But that wave seems to be cresting now because Nik Bonitto has continued the pace that he started in the 2024 season into this season. He currently leads the NFL in sacks, and that also kind of overshadows what Jonathon Cooper's been able to do coming off of a 10.5 sack season last year. He's at 4.5 this season so far through 6 weeks in 2024, playing opposite of Nik Bonitto. And in his 5th year in the NFL, fresh off of a contract extension, playing some pretty damn good football as well. I think it is time that we make a definitive statement on the question about Nik Bonitto and Jonathon Cooper. Are the two Denver pass rushers officially as a tandem broken out and considered among the other top-tier elite pass rushing duos in the NFL? My answer to that question is yes. I think you take Nik Bonitto's season last year and Jonathon Cooper's season last year, 2 double-digit sack artists. They're carrying it over into this year. And they're not just carrying it over and keeping things status quo. They're putting their foot on the gas. When you're looking through the first 6 weeks of the NFL season, no tandem in the NFL has more combined sacks than Nik Bonitto and Jonathon Cooper at 12.5. Not Aiden Hutchinson and Al-Qadim Muhammad in Detroit. Not Byron Young and Jared Verse. Not Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau. Not Dorrance Armstrong and Von Miller. But Nik Bonitto and Jonathon Cooper. Sample size is a big thing we've talked about needing to see more, specifically as it relates to Nik Bonitto with his contract extension that came this offseason. And yes, with some of those other names on that list and others in terms of individual athletes like Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons and TJ Watt, who weren't in terms of the top 5 tandems, but individually are some of the best and have been some of the best for a number of years. Nik Bonitto doesn't have the length in the tooth and the longevity, nor does Jonathon Cooper, to put that kind of sample size together. But the two of them coming off of the edges here in Denver has reached a point of productivity for me that puts them firmly in that conversation with other tandems around the league. And I do believe that as this season continues to progress the way it has through 6 weeks of the season so far, 6 weeks from now, as I told James Palmer on our show yesterday, I think we are going to be talking further about Nik Bonitto and Jonathon Cooper cementing themselves among those other great names. And in terms of the Broncos defense as a whole, do they have a Super Bowl championship caliber defense? Yes, I actually think that they do. That game against the Jets, the way that they had relentless pressure as a team, not coming from one side or even from the edges, but from the inside, from the outside, from the linebacker core, from the secondary with Talanoa Hufanga and the intermediate with Caden Stearns, plus the interior pass rushers like Zach Allen and JFM, plus Jonathon Cooper and Nik Bonitto on the outside. Wherever you could bring it, the Broncos brought it against the Jets, and it was one of the first times in recent memory, certainly this season, where that Denver Broncos defense reminded me of the Super Bowl 50 defense. I'm not here to put them on the same level. I'm not here to say that the Super Bowl 50 defense in 2015, in my opinion, is a top 2 or 3 defense in the history of the NFL, and it ain't 3. That's for sure. So I'm not here to try to stack resumes side by side, although statistically speaking, this Broncos defense is ahead of pace or better than the 2015 defense was at certain points. It just hasn't necessarily been complemented on the offensive side of the football from a talent or production perspective consistently. But this Broncos defense, if they can produce similar outings week in and week out, because you're probably not going to be able to expect that kind of 9 sacks in an NFL game is obscene. That is almost disrespectful to the fact that there are NFL athletes and coaches and an organization that gets paid a lot of money on the other side of you to get after the quarterback that well. And it brings up the conversation about whether or not that performance positively for the Broncos defense and negatively for the Broncos, the Jets offense, is more of an indictment of how bad the Jets have been, are still searching for their first win in the NFL season, or how good the Broncos defense has been. And I think there's probably a gray area in the middle, but I don't want that to take away, because I do think that the Broncos defense producing the way that they have produced from a pressure standpoint and a blitz standpoint under a blitz-heavy, aggressive Vance Joseph defensive scheme, with the back-end coverage ability that they've shown with their secondary, is not something that I think you can understate or that I want to underappreciate and undervalue. We'll get into a little bit more tomorrow about the offensive side of the football and what things may need to change if the Broncos offense is going to hope to provide complementary assistance or attempt to raise their bar to the level that the defense has set. But for now, I think it is safe to say that this Broncos defense, when they're firing on all cylinders, especially with the schedule they have in front of them, should be performing, and I think will perform at a Super Bowl championship playoff caliber level in this 2025 season. The Colorado Buffaloes may have had a season-saving victory against 22nd ranked Iowa State this past Saturday. And the answer to the question of whether or not you think it, quote unquote, saved their season, I suppose, depends on what you think the ultimate goal for the Colorado Buffaloes season currently is or should be. Prior to the season, coming off of a 9-4 year with Shedeur Sanders and the Heisman Trophy winner Travis Hunter, plus plenty of talent in the wide receiver room that is now playing on Sundays in the NFL, and some inconsistency and uncertainty in the run game, the expectation in year 3 of Coach Prime was to continue to build on that and continue to compete for a Big 12 Conference championship appearance at the minimum, which they had the runway lights on for last year going into that game on the road against Kansas, where Devin Neal absolutely ran them into the ground and changed the trajectory of their season for the worse. This game against Iowa State, where the Buffs hung tight for 4 quarters, ended up pulling away and getting their best win in the Coach Prime era since 2023 in week 1, when Coach Prime's debut as the Buffs head coach finished with an upset victory over a ranked TCU team that was coming off of a national championship appearance. And even though they didn't finish as strongly as they came into the season expecting to, with a 5-7 record at TCU, it still represented a kicking the door down of the Coach Prime era that they have been unable to match in their next 8 consecutive tries until this Iowa State victory, when you're talking about ranked Power 4 opponents. So did it save the Buffalo's season? I actually want to say no. I don't know that it saved their season or significantly changed the trajectory. What I do think is it confirmed that the goal for this season up in Boulder is to get to 6 or more wins, hell or high water, and make a bowl game, which one could argue, after losing your starting quarterback, losing a 2-way Heisman Trophy player, one of the best players in all of college football, let alone the Big 12 Conference, letting a lot of talent in the wide receiver room go, having to do something that Coach Prime has never done in his coaching career, which is shepherd a team and coach an offense that is not quarterbacked by his son. When you factor in all of those things, one could argue that making a bowl game and getting to 6 wins should have been maybe the more realistic goal for many, and is an acceptable goal to continue to pursue. So I don't know that it saved their season, because ultimately, if it didn't happen against Iowa State and they fell further in the standings, the mission for the season probably changes, and maybe Julian Lewis becomes a more intriguing factor at that point. But I do think this. Caden Salter, although he has no use to the Buffaloes beyond this season in his final year of eligibility, and although he has been shaky at times in his ability to maximize his skill set as an athletic, mobile quarterback, making plays with his feet and down the field with his arms, he gives the Buffs the best chance to win a football game. And the way that the Buffs can win football games in 2025 is having an offense that gets the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly into the hands of the talented playmakers they have out on the boundaries at wide receiver and in the backfield at running back. Their defense showed up big against Iowa State, kind of willing them to victory and spurring on an offense that has sputtered at times in painful moments, or certainly failed to close offensively the way they did against TCU. But if they don't continue to find ways to do that consistently, the Caden Salter that showed up against Iowa State needs to be the Caden Salter that they see going forward under the remainder of their schedule. Because make no mistake about it, the Buffs being 3 wins away from bowl eligibility and ultimately achieving what I think is the reasonable goal in front of them, which is get to 6 wins and make a bowl game to salvage some of the hype going into the 2026 season, is not a lock by any means. They've got a bye week coming up at a very critical time, because after the bye, they face a Utah team that is much better than a year ago when the Buffs beat them by 25. They are one of the better teams in the Big 12 Conference. They've got an Arizona game coming up after that with a beatable opponent, but the Buffs have proven that they cannot have any gimmies assigned to them so far this season. West Virginia, same category. A team the Buffs should beat, but there are no gimmies for this 2025 iteration of the Colorado Buffaloes. Then you've got Arizona State, who I assume would hope to have their starting quarterback back, and Kansas State to finish the season, which has proven to be a difficult game for the Colorado Buffaloes, regardless of the dynamics at play and who is on what side for Coach Prime in this era at CU. So they need 3 to accomplish that goal, and there aren't 3, really there aren't any, but there certainly aren't 3 games to point to on their schedule where I think many can confidently say that's a win. So if they're going to get to that point, they need the Caden Salter that showed up against Iowa State, going toe-to-toe with Rocco Becht, one of the better quarterbacks in the conference, and a well-coached team under Matt Campbell, and push that going forward. Because if not, we are going to wonder whether or not sticking with Caden Salter was the right decision, or whether or not they should turn the keys, or should have turned the keys, to Julian Lewis at that point, who projects to be the immediate and potential long-term future for the Buffs at quarterback. Plenty to chronicle and tab onto as both of those teams continue to forge forward into their football season. CSU coming off of a potentially job-saving coaching performance by them. Offensively for Jay Norvell, one of the biggest games in terms of offensive output that his team has put together, and we will see how much length that buys for Jay Norvell going into the 2025 back half of this season and into 2026. With the Wild West landscape of college football, you certainly can't bank on or guarantee any kind of job security. Just ask James Franklin, who was coaching a top 3 team a handful of weeks ago, about a month ago, and was looking to be a legitimate repeat offender in the college football playoff, and now finds himself the recipient of a pretty insanely large buyout from Pennsylvania State University. Going to get into the Avalanche tomorrow, who are on an absolute tear to start their season and are already having me maybe thinking things that it might be too early to think. You'll have to be the judge of that and tell me tomorrow. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we will catch you at noon tomorrow for the next rundown.
I do what I love what I do. It's second nature to put in the work.